Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot. Hey, everyone. Super stoked to be here for Startup Week Boston 2022 and this session on creating trust and synergy between product and engineering teams. I'll be your moderator today. And yeah, excited to be here with this group of product leaders. I'll call out again, like feel free to drop stuff in the QA chat for those of you that are virtual. And we'll start with some introductions of ourselves and our professional backgrounds just to set the backdrop for discussion. I'll go ahead and get us started. My name is Nick Morton. I'm a Boston native, born and raised, so I was pretty happy with the result of the Pats game on Sunday. And I studied mechanical engineering at Johns Hopkins University, and then came running back to Boston, where I got my start in product at a company called Cognex. They are a machine vision company headquartered in Natick, Mass. And at the time, they were looking to hire engineering grads to groom into product managers. And I had always had an interest in business strategy as well as the engineering side. So I was happy to take them up on it. And I spent a few years there introducing vision products into the logistics market for factory automation. And since then, I spent the past couple of years here on the product management team at Mark Forged. We're out of Watertown. And we make industrial grade 3D printers, materials, and software. That's all used in a variety of industries like manufacturing, automotive, education, defense. The team and technology are phenomenal, so I'm having a great time. And next, let's start with Avantika, since she's virtual as well. And then we can move to the in-person folks, Vanessa, Bruno, and Alicia.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Avantika. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I currently lead the product teams at Figma, working on our collaboration tools and our native apps. Figma is a web-based design tool, in case you haven't heard of us. Our goal is to democratize design and make it accessible to everyone. And it's funny because it's actually my job to understand how PMs, designers, and engineers can more effectively collaborate through the design and development process. So the topic of this panel is very, very top of mind for me. Prior to Figma, I've held a number of different roles. I started my career out as a management consultant at McKinsey. I moved into data science at Google. I've also held product management roles at Microsoft, Birchbox, and Pinterest. So done a mix of big company and small company work. Also seen the product process from a variety of different roles. So yeah, I think this is going to be fun. Thank you for having me again.
Should we keep going?
Awesome. Yeah. So for the in-person folks, maybe Vanessa can get us teed up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Ferranto. I currently head the product team at Pointillist. It's a customer journey analytics product. We use AI and machine learning to better understand how customers flow through journeys at various companies. We recently got acquired by Genesis, so I'm going through that wonderful experience of small startup growing into a very big company. So I can definitely give advice there. My background is somewhat varied. I actually graduated with a music degree, but came into this path of product management through financial services startup. I've held roles predominantly in product, but worn many hats because I've had a lot of startup experience across a variety of different industries. I was in fintech, digital media, e-commerce, transportation, just a whole gamut of things, but found myself at a large company again, but definitely can provide also some experience both as a first-time product manager, also head of product and building teams within an organization. I spent a lot of time also introducing process within an organization, so figuring out how product works with design, with engineering, with sales, kind of carving out that niche. So happy to share that experience as well.
Cool. Bruno, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. My name is Bruno Couto. I'm a technical product manager at Chewy.com. We are an e-commerce company selling both hard goods, physical products, and also services for pets and pet parents. We want to do everything you and your pets need. So at Chewy, I work with the orders management system. So every single package that gets to people's houses goes through my service. So lots of scale. But prior to that, I had all of my career in startups. And it's been an interesting change to bring all of those lessons learned and the frugality and the multiple hats and all the stuff you have to do when you don't have a massive organization into this kind of company now. So a little bit of background. I started my career as a software engineer. So happy to be here and talk more about this since I've made the transition. I had a stepping stone kind of project management consulting, and then finally landed in product. Worked in many different industries: education, fintech, B2B, data, many different things, and a little bit of healthcare. So happy to share that experience. It is you.
All right, everyone. I can just roll in. I'm the last one.
Yeah.
But my name's Licio Miranda. I am a born and raised Bostonian, just like Nick. But when I was 17, I left for college in the Midwest. So, engineering, Notre Dame, University of Michigan. I cheer for both teams. So people try to get me to pick sides. I will not. But after that, I stayed in the Midwest, was in Detroit for a number of years working as an engineer at Chrysler. And my entire career has been in the field of autonomous driving. So sort of at the intersection of hardware and software. Started out as an engineer, did a whole bunch of different things: validation, functional integration, hardware releasing, software, but had my taste of big OEM life and moved on to smaller automotive companies, where I led bigger teams, led projects, got my first taste of product management at Lucid Motors, launched the 2022 Motor Trend Car of the Year, which I'm super pumped about. I led the what is the equivalent of autopilot system for Lucid Motors. And then I came back home to Boston, where I was a product lead at Motional, where we were releasing fully autonomous robotaxis. There's currently an operation running in Las Vegas. So if you go out there today, you can pull out your Lyft app and call a fully autonomous robotaxi to go take you around to any casino if you're a gambler, I guess. But I recently left Motional, and today I'm a group product manager at Gatic AI, where our goal is to commercialize the middle mile with autonomy. So we basically put out Class 6 and Class 7 trucks to mobilize the supply chain and modernize some of our shipping and supply chain things that we have. But I'm excited to be here, excited to talk to y'all about my transition from engineering into product and some of the things I've learned along the way, especially working on something very complex that takes a lot of moving pieces to work. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. This first question I'd like to start with here is, again, laying a little more context for everyone. But during your experiences in product, what could you go through and discuss, like, what types of engineering teams you've worked with, be it software, hardware, data, apps teams, etc. And I'd like to start with Vanessa. I think you're unique on the panel here as somebody that got into product at first without a technical background, and maybe in addition to discussing the types of engineering teams you worked with, also commenting on what it was like not being technical, at least at first.
Sure. Yeah. So I have worked with a lot of different types of technical teams, software, hardware, the data, mobile applications as well, built out APIs. So really the full stack, full suite of engineering teams. I've also worked with engineering teams that are both in-house, outsourced, or mixed between the two, which presents, some unique challenges as well. From a technical perspective, I'd say there are definitely pros and cons to not being from a technical background, and I would definitely love to hear kind of your experiences as well. I'd say the more I've learned about technology, how technology works, getting under the hood, it's allowed me to ask questions that I wouldn't have otherwise known to ask, or it allows me to challenge in ways that I might not have otherwise challenged. But at the same time, regardless of the experience that I've gained, the way in which I approach conversations with the engineering teams, regardless if they're in-house or offshore or agency-based, is essentially presenting the problem, right? So I think we all come to the table, product design, engineering, with our unique skill sets, with our perspective, and we want to take advantage of that experience. When I work with engineering teams, really I like to focus on who's the problem, who has the problem, what is the problem, what does success look like, and use that as the starting point for conversations. Really empower the engineering team to come up with designs, with solutions, and use that as an opportunity to have a conversation, push back where I need to, again, based on the experience that I have, and ask the questions that I think are critical to getting to the right outcome. So that's really the relationship that I like to establish with engineering. Again, it's about building that trust, as the topic of this session suggests. The nuance, I would say, between working with a full-time or an in-house team versus an agency or outsource is there's a different level of trust or accountability that sometimes exists. And I find that someone who's more officially part of the team, there's a little bit more skin in the game. So if I do have teams that are maybe outsourced or agency based, having an engineering lead or somebody who can really own the relationship with that agency or outsourced team is really important, so that they can drive the accountability from an engineering perspective, just like on the product side, we'll want to drive accountability with our product team to make sure that we're getting to the right outcomes and working towards the right goals. So I'd say that that's one thing that's been really important with the various teams that I've worked with in order to be successful.
And so you after getting started in products, found some or maybe made some time to dig into technical subject matter, like a bit on your own, or how did you approach that?
Yeah, so like with the first company I was at, because I wore many hats, one of them was, BI to some degree. So I taught myself SQL to essentially be pulling data out and running queries and putting together some analyses. Also helped the marketing team create email templates. So taught myself some HTML, CSS, things like that. So some of it was self-taught. I also did take some courses because I was interested in like Python and more data analysis. So I took some courses on Coursera, things like that. So it was really around, I had an interest. I definitely wanted to understand, wanted to participate in a way that, I couldn't prior because I didn't have the knowledge, the experience. So it was really about self-education. And I think through that self-education, I was able to apply those learnings in the conversations and relationships that I've had.
Awesome. Yeah. And then, Bruno, if you could also go through like the different types of engineering teams that you've worked with, and then the impact of what it was like to start on the technical side and move over and kind of already be speaking the language.
Yeah, sure. So I've worked with mostly software teams and data team in one occasion, and so no experience on the hardware side. Would like to try that one day. It sounds fun, but I was always a little more attracted to the speed and like how quickly you can iterate and deliver different versions of a product. So that was always something that was attractive to me in the digital products. So in moving out of an engineering team, I made that move within the same company, within a startup. And the first barrier for me was learning how to draw the line. So as an engineer, knowing the product I used to be an engineer for, and now I'm not in that role anymore. I'm switching over to a project manager kind of role initially. So how much of your knowledge as a product or a project person or a designer, any kind of leader, can you actually use to influence the work of the team? And I learned the hard way that is very little, like almost none. Otherwise, you end up damaging the sense of autonomy of that team, and it's actually more productive for everyone, for the company and the team and everyone involved in the process, to have that team own up and develop the maturity they need to make their own decisions and own the results. So most of my transition in the beginning, I believe, was gauging how much of my technical knowledge could be applied or not. And like I said, in most cases, I would try to challenge more on the method and the trade-offs, using my technical understanding to evaluate trade-offs much more than to evaluate solutions. solutions were not my place to define anymore. So that was a learning curve, and I've seen multiple teams go through that journey where one of the team members steps out into a different role and has to go through that cycle, and it can be pretty frustrating in the beginning, but it's well worth it because then the entire organization has good knowledge of the product, but still the hats are kind of well defined when you learn how to draw that line.
Yeah, it's a heck of a balance, right? And I think the point that you made there about the engineering team owning the implementation is key, right? Since they're the ones executing. But similarly, I've found, like, for me, the most useful part of the technical background has been knowing when you can challenge the team a little bit. Not, suggesting what the implementation needs to be, right? But kind of, are you sure we can't do that? Or, knowing when you can really ask why. And then it turns out sometimes some creative solutions come out from the team. So Alicia, you've got, you started also as an engineer, right? And then transitioned into the product role and came in with a hardware background already. So I'd love to hear from you on, for sure the engineering teams you've worked with, but also how having that technical background has impacted how you go about your role.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's really interesting about the product that I work on is how inherently cross-functional it is. And the dependencies go across all of it, right? Like down from the data pipeline, which I work with data teams, hardware teams, software teams, internal and external development teams. Like that has an impact directly on, say, the perception stack on how you're, detecting objects, right? Depending on the training data that you're getting in, which then has an impact on your planning stack, which has an impact on all of it down the line, right? And I think that some of the value that I derived being a technical person before going into product actually came out of the fact that I'm able to provide context, provide a little bit further vision to the team. So echoing what Bruno said, right? It's not about evaluating solutions, but it's about giving the folks that are working on the problem context to be able to make the right decisions, right? So if I have something that maybe I did in my past as an engineer, I'm more than willing to bring up something that I've encountered in my past as a story, but as a way to sort of seed ideas, as a way to seed solutioning within the team, because I kind of have to take a step back and, have the humility to say, I don't have all the context that the team also has on this specific solution, on this specific architecture that they're working on, right? Because if I come in and I start steamrolling and saying, no, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing that, then you start breaking down the trust of the team. You start breaking down their ability to engage in the company and the product. But then you also start potentially putting out solutions that, don't relate completely to the product that you're building, right? They doesn't have all the contextual understanding behind it. So it's been a fine balance, right? As like an engineer, I really want a solution. That's like in my nature. But as a product person, you really have to take a step back and understand that your role is to consider the customer, the value that you're deriving from the product, and putting in place, especially as a product leader, putting in place the guardrails that allow the team to solution towards that value for the customer. All right, so that's been a really interesting journey to go on, but ultimately very, very fruitful in terms of my own personal experience. So I'd encourage anybody who's an engineer going to product to kind of figure out what learnings you can get from that process as well.
Awesome. And Avantika, you came also with a computer science background. How did that impact the way that you've approached product management?
Yeah, so I have a computer science engineering degree, but I've never actually worked professionally as an engineer. So I think my story is a little bit closer to Vanessa's, where I think I did have to have this interest in learning and relearning some of the technical concepts that I learned in school, like this technical curiosity to understand what's happening under the hood. Yeah, and I think that's really important. For a lot of the reasons that others on the panel have mentioned, like being able to challenge some of the decisions being made, understanding different technical approaches, unblocking the team. And one thing I also wanted to call out is just like earning the respect of your engineering teams. I think this can be particularly an uphill battle as a female PM, Sometimes like you're often labeled as a non-technical PM or somebody who doesn't understand how, the system works. And so you have to work a little bit harder to make sure that you really understand what's happening and you can communicate effectively with your team. So yeah, that's been more of my experience.
Cool. I'd like to stay with you for the next question, which is a fun one for, I'm sure, everyone in the room. But in your experiences as product manager, and especially considering the different companies you've been at different stages and sizes, what have been the boundaries of what has really been under the ownership of product management, and that you feel strongly, ought to be, and then where does that line start to get blurred, and how have you gone about empowering other functions, particularly the engineering teams, to be able to make decisions on their own that impact the product, but that are sort of out of scope for what a product manager would define?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I will say that I think there's a general framework that I feel like is a little bit oversimplified. Like a lot of people say the why and the what are like the decisions that the product manager owns, and the how and the when are typically engineering decisions. But I think at the end of the day, you want the person with the most context to own the decision and the outcome of the decision. And I don't think that necessarily always has to be the product manager. I often say that product managers are not the creator of all the good ideas, they are the curators of all good ideas. And so an engineer could run into a challenge while implementing and might need a quick product decision to block them. And if they feel empowered to take that call, that's more power to them. I think we should encourage that. And I think a lot of the best products are built because, functions don't feel restricted to their lanes. There is this, you can flow between your functions and give input into other functions' decisions. The one rule I like to apply to this is just thinking through decisions as type 1 or type 2 decisions. I'm not sure if folks have heard that framing, but type 1 decisions are not reversible. You have to be really careful when you make them. Type 2 decisions are kind of like walking through a door. If you don't like the decision, you can always go back. And I think being very intentional about when you make which type of decision is important. And I think oftentimes as organizations get larger, there's a tendency to use type 1 decision making on every decision. And so the PM needs to make all the decisions, everything needs to be documented and like clearly laid out. And it just slows the team down. There's a risk aversion, there's a failure to experiment, there's less innovation. And so I think like if you can find those decisions, which, the cost of making the wrong call isn't that high, you can change your mind if you need to. Empowering the rest of the team to really take those calls, making sure they're documenting and communicating those decisions to keep everyone on the same page. But not really like holding the ownership of those decisions so tightly as the product manager feels really important. On the flip side, like type 1 decisions, things like, we want to change the pricing and packaging plans, or things like we want to make really big brand decisions or huge product mental model changes. I think those are really, really like irreversible decisions or very hard to reverse. And I think those in particular, like we should make sure that the role that's taking the decision is really like well thought out and is the person who has the most context and experience to make it.
Yeah. Have you always worked with like a sparring partner on the design side for sort of really refining the look and feel of the product that the engineers are building?
Yeah, typically the teams I've worked with, there's like this triad of roles. They say like the product design and eng leads. And so on the product side, I think product and design offer bouncing ideas between each other. But we also like to really bring in the engineers into the thought process too, early on in the product development process.
Alicia, on the, again, with the kind of representing the hardware world out there, how have you seen this in terms of walking the line of what a PM needs to own, what you need to delegate, and how are you able to push those decisions down?
Yeah, I think Avantika, right? Did I get that right? My bad.
Yeah. Good. No, good.
Made a lot of really, really great points there. Like, in my opinion, I really try to empower my teams to make as many of the decisions as possible, and curating, right, to use the terminology, curating the decisions that come out of that is how I try to frame my role as opposed to creating them. And the reason is I'm a big believer that innovation is a function of vulnerability and courage in an organization, right? So by empowering your organization to have the courage to be vulnerable with one another and actually, excuse me, I don't know how that works, but giving them the ability to actually speak their minds, right, and say, this is what I think, right, putting forth ideas and also creating the environment where those ideas are heard and discussed and in a respectful way is really important. So as a product leader or as someone who's trying to put together a product, focusing on the systems that you have in place as an organization to foster that kind of environment is really, really important, right? So yeah, it's hard to say for sure what exactly is a decision that a PM should make versus a decision that a team should make. But I like to engage everybody in an organization. I think that's really critical. There are no bad ideas. There are just bad ways to handle ideas that folks come up with. So yeah.
I like it. Vanessa, maybe you could give us your lens, especially maybe considering some of the smaller orgs that you've been in where you're wearing more hats and lots of people are wearing more hats.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say about product is, being a first product hire in a lot of organizations, I definitely have a perspective of people don't really know in those cases what product management is, which I think is one challenge because the lines are very much blurred in terms of who owns what decisions or what's the right level of collaboration. And then if you also layer in kind of this tiered structure in terms of the product function. So, a head of product, you might have product managers, and then you might also have product owners in the mix. Product management and decisions within product management, that flavor changes. So that's one kind of area. And then on the other side, when we're thinking about collaboration between design and engineering and product, kind of going into who owns the decisions there. If we look at just the truest kind of team-based structure, regardless of what the hierarchy or organizational construct is within an organization, that team-based structure, I go back to kind of what I was saying before, which is we're all there with our own experience, with our own skill sets, but we also have our own responsibilities within the organization. And I think where the responsibility falls is where kind of those decisions typically need to lie in some regards. And when it comes to making decisions around technical architecture, making sure systems are scalable, making sure that you can build something that works with both internal tools, external tools, things like that. I think it's important for the engineer to really own the decisions there, or engineering leads to really own the decision there, but they can't do it within a vacuum, right? They need to understand from a product perspective what product owns the decisions on, which is who are our customers, what is the market opportunity, what problems are we trying to solve, what value are we trying to deliver. So there's a relationship there that needs to be built, and that trust needs to come into play so that each person is putting in their perspective, their requirements, ultimately their responsibility and accountability, so that you can get to the right answers, the right solutions as a team. And when you bring design into the mix, it's the same thing. Like, we need to deliver certain experiences to our customers to make sure that people can find what they need to do, shorten the time to task, things like that. So when it comes to kind of landing on decisions around user experience and UIs, I think it's really important that designers take ownership of that around the decisions. But again, none of this can happen within a vacuum. And I think others were saying this as well. It's a strong collaboration. The best ideas, the best solutions come because a team is working together. We're bringing the perspectives. We're empowering each other to make those decisions, but we're not doing it in isolation. We're doing it together.
Cool. And Bruno, how has your experience compared?
So I would echo everything you guys just said. As we have this discussion, there is a very strong image that always comes to my mind. It's on that movie Interstellar, where they're trying to decide which is the last planet they're going to visit, and they only have a certain amount of fuel. They only have like oxygen and 2 or 3 people. So everyone has to vote equally and own that decision to the same level, despite there being some kind of hierarchy amongst them. but everyone has to own it because they're all going to live or die together. And a lot of times for a startup, it's that kind of decision that's being made. If you try to focus your product on a really complex design that may or may not be accomplished in a way that solves the user problem, or you try to focus your product on a really complex data solution that you may or may not achieve through the data you already have, what do you have left when you get to the end of that trial and that discovery process? Do you have enough resources to pivot and do something else and still accomplish something valuable for that year or for that period? Or do you still have enough cash to go around and do something more? Are you at a better place in terms of knowing the product and the customer needs to go out there and get more funding? Sometimes you learn that was not the outcome, but you still learn something else that helps you pivot the product, the entire startup or whatever it is, and go to investors with a better approach, with a different idea, and that works. But if someone on the table, if someone's missing on the table when making decisions, or not everyone owns their piece to the decision, then it's very likely that it's either not going to work or it's not going to achieve the optimal result.
Yeah. So, I mean, this resonates with my experience as well. I mean, the punchline here has really been collaboration is the key, right? Especially for getting everybody to buy in on the direction you've ultimately gone in. And I mean, I'll say, every once in a while, a situation will come up where, you have to make a decision that not everyone agrees on, but definitely try to limit that because it sort of taxes the social capital you have with the team, right? And the credibility. For the next topic, I want to start with Avantika again, as somebody that leads a product focused on collaboration. How do you work with your tech lead and your designer, that trio that you mentioned earlier, and other engineers in the product discovery process specifically?
Yeah, I'm super excited about this question. Like you said, making collaboration more effective is basically what I'm paid to do. So before getting to the specifics of your question, I actually wanted to share, Figma recently ran some research to understand not just what collaborative activities people do on teams, but also like which ones specifically led to better outcomes for a product team. And the behaviors were kind of interesting. I think the first we learned was co-creation. So actually like being together in a file or, in some sort of artifact and bouncing ideas back and forth, like really jamming together is one of them. The second is rapport, which I think is kind of underinvested in, particularly in like the hybrid environment today, but building that sense of camaraderie with your team, like actually knowing each other beyond just the work. Role clarity, which I think we just spoke about, understanding who needs to be involved in which specific types of decision. The fourth is feedback, making sure that you actually have forums to have discussion on the work and iterate on it. And then the last is reflection. So time to discuss what is and isn't working with the team. And so going back to your specific question around the product discovery process, I think thinking to those behaviors, I think one of the principles I always like to take when I approach this is just to bring other disciplines into the process sooner. And so this is really important. It just avoids a lot of wasted work. Like the worst thing you can do is like get really excited about a solution, then you find out a month later is just not technically feasible to build. And it also just generally builds more trust between the functions. I think our engineers have really, really appreciated it when they've had a chance to actually sit in on user research sessions and listen to like the user insights firsthand. They really appreciate it when design handoff isn't just like throwing some designs over the wall and saying, build this. It's really like a conversation where the team can ideate on the right solution. The team can like actually hear why they're working on the things that they are. And so, yeah, I think the first principle for me is just bringing folks in sooner. The second thing I wanted to touch on is just like the notes around rapport and reflection, I think are also really important. So not like specific to discovery, the discovery process, but I think that's just something that's easy to forget, particularly when you're working on Zoom with remote teammates, is that like, if your team doesn't have a basic level of camaraderie amongst each other, just start there. Like I think warm-ups, icebreakers, it just humanizes the team, breaks the ice, creates good vibes. And I think people are just like much more likely to share and trust each other if they feel like you really understand them. So yeah, those are like some of the things I like to keep in mind to bring people in.
Got it. And how big are the, I guess, product teams, meaning the engineering team that's working with you and the designer? How big are those groups typically?
They've ranged, honestly. I think the when I've worked at startups, it's been like really small squads, like 3 or 4 engineers, a PM that kind of is wearing the researcher hat too, and then a designer. I think right now at Figma where I'm at, it's about 8 to 10 engineers in a product squad, and we have a designer and a researcher, and so and an analyst. So I think there's like different levels of support and sizes of teams depending on the company that you're at.
Got it. So, Alicio, on the hardware side, and I don't know if curious to hear how you think of product discovery and how that might be different with what seems like a really long-term kind of vision and roadmap. Like, how big are the teams that you're working with, and when are you pulling in? How are you pulling in tech leads and designers to help really define the roadmap?
Yeah, in terms of the teams, I was leading a product that had about 800 engineers working on the product, right? And that is nearly impossible to get 800 engineers around one specific problem, right? So I come to find that defining the customer is really important as you go through the layers of the product and figuring out the connections, how you're defining success between these customers that you're delivering towards has helped clarify who adds value to a specific discussion around a certain problem. But in general, for the product discovery process, regardless of which level of the product you're talking about, and just to clarify a bit, the way that I look at it is like when you're talking about delivering an entire autonomous vehicle maneuver, for example, you're delivering that to a specific place, right? But then that maneuver feeds into certain capabilities that are specific to that maneuver, right? So you go into that system thing, but being like Avantika said, bringing people in early, the people that are responsible within that area. So whether that's the tech leads, the designers, whomever, bringing them as early as possible, getting that feedback, and also being transparent to the rest of the organization about the process that's currently going on, right? So generally, it's like a 3-stage process for me. It's talking to people to figure out who is going to be involved in any given initiative, right? Kind of going one by one, figuring that out. The second is being transparent about any activity that's going on when it comes to designing, coming up with any specific solution and opening it up to everybody, gathering that feedback, and then making sure everyone is heard in that discussion, giving people the time to reflect on that discussion, come up with some solution, going back to people individually, putting the pieces together, and then presenting it back out, right? That way, everyone feels like they're a part of the process. They feel like their voice has been heard, and then they can buy in on whatever solutions have come out of that discovery process. It doesn't always work. Like, I find that I've had to tailor things at times, right? The frameworks are frameworks, but they're not always 100% fit to a specific problem. So understanding the team and the trust that you have with each of the team members, and also being sensitive to the political needs. I'm a person that really despises politics. I've never been good at it. My engineer comes out very much whenever I'm involved in politics. But in general, just being empathetic and understanding that people are in different stages of their journey, and maybe you should include a hardware lead on a software discussion in this instance, right? Because it helps build trust within the team. It helps them feel like they can be heard, and it helps them feel like they can engage, right? When you do that, when you have that transparency and you have that base level of trust that makes everyone feel heard, then that ultimately creates for a better product, in my opinion.
Okay, so I mean, with a team of 800 engineers, like how many of them are you interfacing with?
Yeah, you try to find the right people at the right time. Doesn't always work, but in general, I try. If things get bigger than 15, right, then you need to start talking about how you're breaking up the product, how you're architecting the system. You look at the needs of the customer and try to work with the engineering leads to organize your teams in a way that delivers the most value, right? As your team grows, as your startup grows, your goals will start shifting, and trying to align an organization, which isn't always easy, to those goals is really key to your success, in my opinion, because I'll find that engineering teams will try to self-organize into the components, into the disciplines that make the most sense for the things that they work on. Whether it's perception or planning or control systems, they'll try to organize into those components. But for autonomous driving, the customer, the people riding in the vehicles don't care about the control system, right? They care about whether the vehicle gets them from A to B. So how do you organize those disciplines into a team that delivers value? That's key, and it depends on your product.
Got it. And Vanessa, again, I'll be interested to hear like how this went, as being sometimes the first product person on board and at orgs of different sizes. But like, how have you worked with the engineering leaders to help define what you're going to build?
Yeah, so at my current company, about a little over a year and a half ago, I had joined, and I was the first official product hire. There also wasn't a designer, so I have a design background as part of one of the hats that I developed over the years. So I kind of came in and I was product, I was UX, UI, I was also user research. So that was nice because I wore the many hats and I could sit in a conversation with, the engineering team. And at that point, when I had joined, it was pretty small, maybe about 20 or so, a few full-time employees, and then we have a lot that are part of an agency. So collaboration there was really being able to kind of carry many voices with an engineer and being able to be very rapid in terms of feedback and design and development as it relates to the requirements. As we began to grow and as we became part of Genesis, the larger company, it changes the dynamic. So you definitely have to consider, I'm no longer the product person across all the product verticals. I'm also no longer the designer. We also have a UX researcher, and we've got the engineering team building out with specific engineering leads covering the various areas of the platform. So a completely different dynamic that happened over the last 6 to 9 months. And so collaboration is definitely different between those two dynamics. And what I found that has worked really, really well, both when we were small and as we continued to grow, was making sure, one, there were the right partnerships, and where I couldn't be in all the conversations and I couldn't wear all those hats, making sure the voices were represented. And the structure that we put in place, and you definitely, I don't know that this is going to work with every organization, but the structure that we were able to put in place that started when I was onboarded to the company originally, and then also as we grew, are these sessions. We call them product engineering reviews, but they include UX, product and engineering. We have a half hour carved out, depending on what part of the cycle we are in product development. It could be 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 5 days a week. It's a half hour. If there's something to talk about, we bring it. We'll bring our engineering, like requirements, user stories, things like that. We'll bring designs that we're considering. Product will be bringing, the problem to the table. And essentially it becomes, you might start with literally an idea. Hey, here's what we're thinking. Anyone have guidance and maybe certain things we want to explore? Or here's some initial designs. How do we want to get feedback on this? Is any pushback on the direction that we're going? But it is that bringing people together very early in the process and making sure you've got those voices at the table. And it does go beyond even today, it does go beyond the engineering leaders. We've got the key engineering contributors, not nearly 800. I think we're up to 40 or so. So still relatively small, but you've got the right voices still specific to the platform verticals. You've got these teams and you can really kind of focus in on, again, making sure that all perspectives are on the table. People can ask questions. We can really iterate over time so that when we get to a place where we need to kick off development, everyone really understands what we're doing. We've taken that feedback into consideration. We've broken down the stories in a way that's consumable and executable, and we can begin to kind of go through our agile process of the grooming and the planning and the pointing. So I definitely really love the model. Again, I don't know that every engineering team or the full scope of the team can really carve out that half hour every day or multiple times a week, or even from a product and design perspective, if that fits within the structure of the organization. But it's definitely worked really well within this organization I'm at, both at the very, very small team model also through this kind of growth that we're having within Genesis.
Awesome. And Bruno, are your teams organized in a similar manner, split by vertical or feature or function? And how do you spar with your engineering partners and design partners?
Yep. So right now we have engineering team split by service. Only one of them has a design agency resource that works with us. But I think over the course of my experience, what has really worked was like really trying to err on the side of over communicating. So you look at the company and culture where you currently are, and that can be an email, that can be Slack, that can be additional meetings. Different places people will react better or worse to different methods. So I've been at startups where if you proposed 2 or 3 product engineering meetings a week, people would just freak out. They're like, no, no, no way, we're not doing it. But sometimes it's like message with like a short summary of initiatives, or we are starting discovery on this. Sometimes one of the companies I worked at had an all hands monthly, and that was the best opportunity to get all teams to have some visibility on everything that was going on. And there's always like a call to action. Do you want to be a part of this or not? If you say something now, we'll add you to all the lists and groups and everything. If you don't, we'll assume you don't see any impact of this initiative into your specific product. So there's definitely many different ways to approach it. But as a product person, over the course of my career, I've always like tried to communicate more rather than less, because it's more likely that you'll find someone along the way that has some idea of how this new initiative, this new product or feature could impact their team and their own separate vertical that I'm not aware of. So that's always helpful.
Cool. Yeah, I've had similar experience, and I've had the advice. Tell them and tell them again, and tell in terms of why it matters to the customer and why we're doing what we're doing. Tell them until the team tells you to stop telling them, which I found never actually happens. So yeah, definitely good to over communicate there. There's a question in the Q&A here. Any books that you all would suggest on the topic of product design and collaboration? I'll share one I keep with me. This is Inspired: How to Create Tech Products That Customers Love, and it's by Marty Kagan. It really walks through how some of the best companies are working in terms of what is the product role, with working with engineering tech leads, with engineering leadership, with head of product, and even just going through and reading it, you might find that some things don't apply to you, but it definitely raised some interesting questions to me and had me asking some questions about should we start doing some things differently. I'll drop that in the chat, and then anyone from the panel, product books on this topic that you would recommend.
Yeah, it's not a product book specifically, but I think this is a great book for anyone to read and use it, apply it to your work. But it's called Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, right? And it focuses on the concepts of courage and vulnerability, and thinking about how those concepts apply in your day-to-day interactions with your team members can really change the way that you work together, right? Increase your effectiveness and build trust with people, because that's at the center of what we do in any industry, any field, right? Like all of our problems are really people-oriented problems. So how do we work with one another? I definitely recommend that one.
What was the title? It was Brene Brown, and
Daring Greatly.
I'm a big fan
we
of
also have a question in the audience, but no, go ahead and answer, but just wanted to let you know we have a question in the live audience as well.
I put my recommendations in the chat. I was just going to second Brene Brown. Big fan. I'm looking at a book by her right now called Dare to Lead, which I think is on a similar vein.
If I could add one I would say radical candor. I don't remember who the author is, but just like establishing that very clear and direct communication channel within like teams. It's really helpful, especially if you talk product and design, when sometimes there's some like pride related to the product and what's being built and how like when a lot of the discussions are about how things look, there's not really an objective right or wrong. So just being able to communicate freely thoughts and feedback is usually great.
Awesome. Let's go to the room.
My name is Shubham. I come from DevOps engineering background, actually. So I had a question around, have you guys ever worked in any environment where you're able to kind of preview the features that engineering is putting out, well before it goes to production, obviously, in like a development environment? And is that important to you guys to keep things on track, or for any other reason, I guess? And what are some of the tools that you've seen and worked with that kind of support that capability?
Yeah, I mean,
Anyone can feel free.
so I've had products that have had those dev staging production environments, and that's been really helpful from a staging perspective. That's when I've been able to go in, take a look at things before they actually go live. It also came with challenges because it wasn't always 100% reflective of production. So things might look better in staging, or they might look worse. And so you kind of have this grain of salt. And then when it goes to production, you definitely want to go back through and do that testing. I've also worked at places where it literally just goes live to production, and you just kind of do one of these things and hope it doesn't really create any sort of major issues for customers. But I think from a comfort perspective, I definitely would prefer to have at least some opportunity to see things before it hits a production environment versus waiting for it to go directly to it. There's a third experience that I've had, and that is kind of having a separate production environment instance. So it's not necessarily staging, it's truly production. So it's the latest version of something, and it's kind of you push it to that specific isolated environment, and that is the precursor before you make that switch over to production. So it's kind of like the truest representation of production, requires like dummy data and all of that stuff as well. But that's probably the closest we've been able to get to like a true production environment. But again, it's not quite what customers experience. So you do have kind of that confidence level that isn't quite 100%. But I'd say it's very important from my perspective as a product person to be able to see what customers are going to see before they actually see it.
Yeah,
Oh, why don't you go ahead? I'll jump in after you.
Okay, real quickly, developing an autonomous vehicle, that's actually a fundamental requirement, right? We're putting out a product that impacts people's lives. And so one thing that we make sure to do is bake that into our acceptance criteria. And we have to have some sort of stage gate through an understanding of, okay, when you're developing a component, how's that component impact the safety metrics at every layer of the product? So, unit testing at the component level to simulation, full vehicle simulation testing is really, really critical. And as a product manager, there's always a lot of questions that come around about like what makes us successful at every stage when we're like evaluating these features. And that is a challenge between technical metrics and product level metrics. How do we define safety as a product? How do we define functionality as a product? All of these questions kind of need to be answered, and it has done some very interesting things to our organization. Who are we holding accountable to these metrics, right? So I'd encourage people who have these types of challenges to understand how their organization is being organized, how they're organized to hold themselves accountable to some of these. Like, we need to make sure that we're testing these things out before we put them out to customers, right?
If I could just actually, you said something that triggered something for me, and that's unit testing is really important. So the environments I've worked on, we haven't really had full coverage. So if you've got like a strong CD like pipeline, and strong unit coverage, unit coverage, I think is really, really important, and would probably help ease that necessity for being able to see things go live. But, coverage has usually been around 30 to maybe 70%. So there's still that opportunity for things to go wrong. So I think that's a key point that you brought up, like those gates and having that kind of confidence level there.
Yeah, I obviously second a lot of the use cases here around testing and making sure the product meets the acceptance criteria. I wanted to just add, there are some use cases that I've seen around needing to see the product to actually make some product decisions that I think are pretty interesting. Like some products, if you work on them, you actually don't get a great sense of how effective they're going to be without real data. Like I've worked on a lot of recommendation-based products, which when you design them on a static screen, they look great in theory, but when you actually put some user data behind them, you realize like, oh, our ranking's actually not going to be that great. Or when you put live thumbnails into the product, like it actually doesn't quite work out. And so we definitely use a staging environment for that, similar to what Vanessa mentioned. And at Figma, we actually leave the products on staging for at least a month so that internally we can test, play around, and even iterate if we need to, because it is with that like real life interaction that sometimes you pull out some really key usability issues, or you might want to adjust some design decisions. So we do that quite a lot. But I'll also say that another tool you can use is design prototyping. So there are tools like Framer. I mean, obviously Figma has a prototyping tool, but if you don't want to expend the cycles of building a thing without having certainty that it's the right thing to build, you can use some prototyping tools to also quickly see what the product's going to look and feel like, and the interactions would be like, to actually like make some informed decisions. So I just wanted to add that.
So sort of on this topic, has anyone worked in an environment where you were able to do staged rollouts and let the product hit 10% of your customers at first and see some results before making a decision on sort of go no-go for the broader audience?
We've like at Pinterest and Google, we always run things in experiments. So it's typically like A/B testing with different groups. And then you can actually have a much more precise way of measuring any like impact to the different groups. And so we could start with a 10% group for each variant and then measure the impact. At Figma, just because we're B2B, our rollouts are typically staged. Sometimes we'll start with a beta group, which is like a small set of customers that we, select to try out a feature first and like solicit more qualitative feedback from them. Then we'll expand it to maybe 10% of our users, and then we'll gradually roll it out just to make sure we can track any regressions. So definitely would suggest, if you're not able to run heavyweight experiments, like at least a staged rollout, make sure that you're more thoughtfully releasing products. Not always possible. I bet in the hardware world that is very, very challenging, but in software development, I would recommend it.
Awesome. Yeah, well, look, I mean, this was a great discussion. I'm so glad everybody was able to jump on today and hammer it out. And, hope the folks in person are having a great time as well and able to chop it up after the call. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining.